Imagine an old wolf standing at the peak of a mountain. He has endured harsh winters, fought his battles, and lost part of his pack. Yet he remains steadfast, with a sharp gaze and an unshaken presence. He doesn't need to bark to command respect. He doesn't need to chase anyone to feel valuable. He's simply there, and his presence alone says it all. Now ask yourself, what do you see when you look in the mirror? Because there are two kinds of older men, those who still carry that inner strength and those who have already given up. The difference isn't in their physique, it's in their attitude, in the way they move through life. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or as if you have nothing left to offer, then you need to hear this. Today we're going to talk about the signs that reveal whether you still have real, undeniable presence as a man. And no, this isn't about how much hair you have or whether you've gained weight. We're going deeper. Because if you still have this, you are unstoppable. The last sign will be the most powerful because it separates the men who still stand strong from those who are merely a shadow of who they once were. I'm Celia, and if you think none of this matters to you anymore, then this video is exactly what you need. Have you ever watched an older man fade away little by little? It didn't happen overnight. First, he stopped taking care of himself. Then, he started moving less. He withdrew into his routine, into his chair, into his silence. And before you know it, he's no longer himself, just a shadow of the man he used to be. The worst part? He doesn't even realize it. He thinks he's just resting, or that he's done enough in life. But what he's really done is surrender without a fight. That's why the first sign that you're still an attractive older man is that you haven't given up on life. It doesn't mean you're running marathons or charming women every day. It means that despite everything you've been through, you're still standing, you're still interested in something, you still have a reason to get up every morning with a drive to do more than just exist. Because when a man gives up, his eyes change. They lose their spark, becoming dull, resigned, absent. And trust me, nothing is less attractive than a man who has stopped fighting. Think of a boxer who spent decades in the ring. His body isn't what it used to be, his punches aren't as fast, but he's still there, his guard up, his determination unshaken. His presence alone commands respect because he hasn't let himself be defeated. Now compare him to another fighter who, at the first hard hit, drops his arms and gives up. Which one would you respect more? Which one still carries a sense of admiration? Exactly. An attractive older man isn't someone who clings to the past or tries to live like he's 30. He's the one who stands firm in his present, still sharpening his mind, his body, and his spirit. It doesn't matter if he's lost things along the way, family, respect, a relationship, opportunities. What matters is that he keeps moving forward without complaints or excuses. And if right now you feel like you're fading, like nothing excites you anymore, ask yourself, am I going to let myself die while I'm still alive, or am I going to reignite the fire? Because a man's attractiveness isn't measured by wrinkles or grey hair, it's measured by the strength with which he continues to face life. If a man is still standing, if there's still fire in his eyes and reasons to keep moving, that alone sets him apart from most. But there's something that defines his presence even more, something that commands respect without a single word. And that brings us to the second key point of this video. Your presence demands respect. Because a man can have an active life, but if others see him as weak, easily manipulated, or irrelevant, his attractiveness fades into thin air. Respect isn't demanded, it's projected. It's something people feel when you walk into a room, when you share your opinion, when you address someone without ever needing to raise your voice. An attractive older man isn't the one who forces his authority with yelling or empty dominance. He's the one whose very demeanor makes it clear that he's not to be treated like just anyone. And this is a serious problem because too many men reach old age only to become decorative figures within their own families. They go from being the head of the household to being a burden, from being the guiding voice to being the voice no one listens to. And the worst part, they allow it to happen. Stoicism makes it simple. If you want respect, start by respecting yourself. But what does that look like in practice? It means you don't beg for attention, you don't lower yourself to be accepted, and you don't tolerate being treated as if you no longer matter. It means that if your kids only call when they need money, you recognize it and set boundaries. If your partner ignores you or treats you with indifference, you don't sit around waiting for scraps of affection. If the world tries to make you feel like you have nothing left to offer, you stand firm and prove otherwise. Think about the men you've respected the most in your life. What did they all have in common? They weren't necessarily the youngest, the richest, or the strongest. They were the ones who knew who they were and refused to be diminished. They were the ones with a gaze that said, "You don't mess with me." And you? Are you still that man, or have you allowed yourself to be pushed into the corner of insignificance? Because real attractiveness in an older man isn't about how he looks. It's about how he commands respect. So far, we've talked about the importance of staying strong and projecting respect. But there's one more thing that separates an attractive older man from one who has lost his essence. He doesn't apologize for his age. And this is the third key point of the video, because too many men, without realizing it, have fallen into the trap of being ashamed of the years they carry. They try to hide them, downplay them, or, worse, compete with younger men as if they still have something to prove. And instead of making them more attractive, it makes them look pathetic. Society has drilled into men's heads the idea that youth is the only stage in life that holds value, and that after a certain age, the only options are to either give up or fight against time. But that's nonsense. A man with experience, with well-earned scars, with a life well lived, has something a younger man can never buy: depth, confidence, a level of self-awareness that doesn't need validation. So why do so many men feel the need to disguise who they are? They dye their hair, dress as if they were 20 years younger, try to talk and act like the generation behind them, as if that could somehow trick time. But the only thing they actually achieve is losing their authenticity. An older man who owns his age walks differently. He doesn't force himself into conversations that don't interest him or pretend to enjoy the latest music trends just to seem relevant. He doesn't flinch when someone calls him sir. He doesn't seek approval in the eyes of younger men. And most importantly, he doesn't let the opinions of others dictate how he should live. Because when a man starts acting as if aging is a failure, he projects that mindset. And if he projects it, he loses presence, he loses attractiveness, and, most importantly, he loses his dignity. The strategy here is simple but powerful. Stop trying to be someone you're not. That doesn't mean letting yourself go or locking yourself in the idea that the past was better. It means embracing your age with pride, understanding that real attractiveness in a man comes from confidence, the way he carries himself, the certainty with which he moves through the world. A man who is comfortable in his own skin is unstoppable. He doesn't try to turn back the clock because he knows that everything he's lived through makes him more valuable, not less. Before we move on to the next point, I want to know something. Where are you watching this video from? Let me know in the comments. And if anything I've said so far has resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. There are still important points left, and the last one is the one that truly separates the men who still command respect from those who have lost their way. If an older man stands firm, commands respect, and doesn't apologize for his age, he already has a huge advantage over those who have let life drag them down. But there's one thing that can ruin it all, something that turns many men into mere spectators of their own existence: begging for attention. This is the fourth key point of the video, and it's where many men stumble without even realizing it. It's easy to fall into this trap. At some point in your life, you were the center of something: a family, a business, a relationship. People needed you, sought your advice, relied on you. But over time, that changed. Your children grew up and now have their own problems. Your partner, if they're still around, no longer revolves around you. Your friends have gone their own way, and society has decided that older people are less relevant. And this is where many men make the biggest mistake of their lives. Instead of embracing their independence with pride, they start begging for attention. What does this look like in practice? It's in calls that didn't need to be made, just to feel remembered, in unnecessary messages, hoping for a response that sometimes never comes, in making excuses to show up in other people's lives, as if needing permission to be seen, in forcing conversations, trying to fit in where they no longer belong, accepting any kind of treatment just to avoid feeling ignored. And the worst part, this doesn't bring people closer, it pushes them away, because no one respects a man who grovels for recognition. The problem is that this need for attention creeps into the mind silently. No one wakes up one day and says, "I'm going to become dependent on others." But it happens. Little by little, the feeling of loneliness becomes unbearable, and you start acting based on that, without realizing that the real solution was never in other people, but in yourself. Because an attractive older man isn't the one who has everyone paying attention to him. He's the one who doesn't need anyone to feel valid. He's the man who can be alone without feeling empty, who respects himself enough not to chase after those who don't value him. The consequences of falling into this trap are devastating. First comes frustration, because you realize the attention you seek never comes in the way or amount you want. Then comes bitterness, because you start resenting those who don't give you the place you think you deserve. And finally, the most dangerous stage, desperation, where some men lower their standards, accepting scraps of company just to avoid facing their own solitude. But here's the truth. A man's respect and attractiveness aren't built on neediness, but on self-sufficiency. If people aren't reaching out to you, instead of feeling sorry for yourself, ask, "What am I waiting for? Why do I care so much about someone calling me when I can build a fulfilling life on my own?" When a man stops begging for attention, something changes, in his eyes, in the way he carries himself. And that, more than anything else, is what makes him truly magnetic. If an older man wants to maintain his attractiveness, his respect, and his place in the world, there's one thing he can never allow: letting himself go and falling into neglect. This is the fifth point of the video, and this is where many men completely ruin everything. Because no matter how confident you are, how much respect you command, or how emotionally independent you may be, if you've allowed yourself to slip into apathy, into physical and mental neglect, what you're really telling the world is that not even you care about yourself anymore. This isn't about vanity or trying to be something you're not. It's not about dyeing your hair, using anti-aging creams, or dressing like you're 30 years younger. It's about something far deeper: self-respect. A man who lets himself go becomes invisible, not because people ignore him, but because he has stopped allowing himself to be seen. And this isn't just about appearance, it's about attitude. Neglect shows in your posture, in the way you walk, in how you speak, in how you face each day. It's in the dull eyes of a man who has stopped finding reasons to take care of himself, in the slumped shoulders of someone who has let life weigh him down, in the drained energy of someone who has silently given up. And the most dangerous part? This kind of neglect doesn't happen overnight. It's not a sudden fall. It's a slow, steady decline. First, you stop caring about how you dress because why bother? Then, you start eating whatever is easiest because it doesn't matter anymore. You stop moving, stop going out, stop seeking new experiences because, at this point, what's the point? And before you realize it, you're no longer the man you once were. You've become a deteriorated version of yourself, not because of time, but because you chose to let yourself go. But here's the truth no one tells you. An older man's attractiveness isn't in the youth he lost, but in the vitality he chooses to maintain. A man who takes care of himself, who stays active, who refuses to surrender to decline as if it's his inevitable fate. He projects something rare, dignity. And dignity is what truly commands respect and admiration. If you've fallen into this state of neglect, there's one thing you need to do right now. Make the decision to pull yourself out of it. Don't wait for motivation. Motivation is a fleeting illusion. What you need is discipline. Start with the basics. Wake up early, dress with intention, move, eat well, straighten your posture. not to impress anyone, but because every one of those actions sends a clear message to your mind. I'm still here. I'm still standing. I am still someone worthy of respect. Because in the end, the question is simple. Do you want to finish your days as someone who let himself be defeated, or as someone who projected strength until the very last moment? The choice, as always, is yours. If an older man lets himself go, the world leaves him behind. It's that simple. There's no romance in neglect, no nobility in giving up. And the worst part, by the time you realize your mistake, it's often too late. But there's something even more damaging, something that doesn't just destroy your attractiveness, but your dignity as well. Letting yourself be manipulated by guilt. This is the 6th point of the video, and this is where many men lose themselves beyond repair. Imagine this. You're 70 years old. You've worked your whole life. You've given, sacrificed, put others first more times than you can count. But now, when you could finally start living for yourself, the looks begin. The concerned comments, the carefully rehearsed pleas. Dad, how can you say no? How can you think about yourself when the family needs you? If you don't help us, who will? And that old reflex kicks in, the one that makes you feel like you always have to give more, like you have no right to put yourself first, like saying no makes you selfish. Guilt is a silent poison. You don't see it coming, but once it's inside you, it takes control. You've been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to what you can do for others, that if you're not useful, you don't deserve respect. And that is the biggest lie. A man who lets himself be manipulated by guilt becomes a slave to his children, his partner, his grandchildren, or anyone who knows how to press the right buttons to make him carry burdens that aren't his to bear. And the cruel irony, no matter how much you give, it will never be enough. Today, they ask for a favor. Tomorrow, they ask for more. And when you can no longer give, they move on without a second thought. So the question is, how long will you let this go on? How many more times will you carry problems that aren't yours? How many more times will you put your own peace of mind last just to avoid being judged? An attractive older man knows how to set boundaries. He understands that helping is fine, but being used is not. He knows how to say, "That's enough," without yelling, without unnecessary explanations, because respect begins the moment you decide to respect yourself. If you stay trapped in this pattern, the outcome is clear. You will burn out. You'll end up being the one who is always available, but never valued, the one who sacrifices, but never gets the same in return. And one day, when you truly need support, you'll realize you were always alone. So make your choice now. Will you keep being the man everyone controls for their own convenience? Or will you become the man who sets the rules for his own life? If you've made it this far, you already know what separates an attractive older man from one who has lost his way. It's not money, it's not looks, it's not status. It's how he stands before life, the way he respects himself, and the courage to refuse to be controlled. But there's one final point, one that changes everything, because without this, all the rest falls apart. You have something meaningful to talk about. Think about the men you admire, the ones who leave an impact, the ones people stop to listen to. They're not the youngest, not the most muscular, not the loudest. They're the ones who know how to speak, who say things with weight, with intelligence, with purpose. And this is where many older men fail without even realizing it. They spend their days repeating the same things. Things were better before. People used to have more respect. Music, politics, and society aren't what they used to be. They've become broken records that no one wants to hear. And the worst part, they don't even realize they've stopped offering anything new, that they've gone from being voices of wisdom to background noise, saying nothing worth remembering. An attractive older man isn't the one who talks the most. He's the one who speaks with substance. He's not the one who tries to impress with the same old stories, but the one who has something to teach, something to share, something that makes people want to keep listening. And this isn't about formal education or fancy titles. It's about curiosity, about continuing to learn, about refusing to let your mind rust. Because a man who stops learning is a man who starts to fade away. If your conversations always circle around the same topics, if people only nod politely when you speak, if you feel like others seek you out less and less because they already know exactly what you're going to say, then it's time to change something. Read, explore, question things. Listen more than you talk. Don't lock yourself into what you think you already know. An interesting man isn't the one who has lived it all. He's the one who still has the curiosity to understand the world. And that's the key, to keep moving mentally and emotionally. Because when an older man has something to say, something truly worth hearing, age stops mattering. This is about respect, presence, and character. If you cling to the same complaints, to empty nostalgia, you'll fade into the background. But if you decide that your voice matters, if you start feeding your mind and building conversations that leave a mark, then no age can make you irrelevant. Because an attractive older man isn't the one trying to sound young. He's the one who, when he speaks, everyone stops to listen. If an older man has something to say, if his voice still carries weight, his presence remains intact. But there's one deeper issue that can tear everything down. Something that separates those who keep moving forward from those who are simply waiting for time to consume them. You don't live in fear of being alone. This is the 8th point of the video, and it's where many men fail without even realizing it. Because loneliness isn't the enemy. The real enemy is the fear you have of it. It's that emptiness you feel when there's no noise around you. That silent panic when you realize the people who once surrounded you have moved on with their lives without asking about yours. It's the desperation some men feel to fill that space with anything: unnecessary calls, forced conversations, draining company. They cling to people who don't respect them, tolerate mistreatment just to avoid being alone, swallow their pride to avoid facing their own reflection. And in the process, they lose the one thing they still had left: their dignity. But here's a truth few are willing to accept. An older man who fears solitude is a weak man. Not because being alone is easy, but because it means he never learned to stand on his own. It means his entire life he depended on the noise of others to feel valid. And now that the noise is gone, he doesn't know what to do with himself. And this is what kills a man's attractiveness. Because nothing is more commanding than someone who doesn't need company to feel whole. Someone who isn't desperately trying to fill his time with empty presence. If you feel weighed down by loneliness right now, understand this. What scares you isn't the absence of people, it's the lack of purpose. A man with a purpose doesn't fear being alone because his mind, his projects, his interests keep him moving. And if you have none of that, it's not loneliness you need to fight, it's your own lack of direction. You don't need anyone to justify your existence. You need something that makes each day feel worthwhile, something that makes you feel like you're still building, if only for yourself. The action here is simple but brutal. Stop running from yourself. If being alone makes you uncomfortable, stay there. Learn to sit with your own silence without fear. Find out who you are without distractions. Because if you can't stand your own company, why would anyone else want to? And when you master this, when solitude is no longer a punishment, but a space where you feel strong, you'll have gained something few men ever achieve: absolute freedom. And there is nothing more attractive than a man who doesn't fear being alone, because that means no one has power over him. If you've made it this far, you already know that an older man's true attractiveness isn't in his physique, his wealth, or the number of people around him. It's in his attitude, his strength, and the way he faces life without asking for permission or making excuses. But there's one final point, the one that truly defines who remains a strong man and who has quietly given up. You keep moving. And this is where many men fail, not because they can't, but because they've decided it's no longer worth trying. You see it all the time. Men who were once active, who had projects, who led, who pursued their passions, and who have now become mere spectators. They spend their days watching TV, complaining that life isn't what it used to be, repeating the same stories without adding anything new. They say they're tired, that they're too old, that they've done enough. But in reality, they've just given up on living. And the problem with that is, life doesn't stop just because you decide to. It keeps going, with or without you. Excuses are endless. I'm too old. Why start something new at my age? That's for younger people. I just don't feel like it. Each of these statements is another nail in the coffin of a man who has surrendered without realizing it. And the most absurd part? It's not the body that holds them back, it's the mind. Because there will always be someone older than you, with fewer resources than you, with more challenges than you, who is still moving forward. And I'm not talking about running marathons or climbing mountains. I'm talking about staying engaged in life, learning, building, doing something that keeps you sharp, alert, connected to the present. If you feel like you've fallen into this trap, like you've become someone who's just waiting for the days to pass, ask yourself, is this really how I want to spend the rest of my life? Because every day you spend doing nothing for yourself is a wasted day. One step closer to becoming invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. And that is a slow death. Change isn't complicated. You don't need to wait for motivation, because motivation is a lie. What you need is a decision. The decision to not stand still while time moves on. The decision to believe your life is still worth something. The decision to accept that no matter your age, you still have something to do, something to discover, something to give. Because the man who stops moving, learning, and challenging himself is a man who has already given up. And if you've made it this far, I know you're not one of them. The only question is, are you going to prove it, or are you just going to nod along and stay the same? If you've made it this far, it's because you're not like the rest. Not everyone has the courage to hear uncomfortable truths without making excuses, without playing the victim, without clicking away at the first hard dose of reality. That already sets you apart, but it's not enough. Listening changes nothing if you keep living the same way. Right now, you have two choices. Let this be just another video you watched and forget everything the moment you close the screen, or take what you've heard and do something with it. No one is coming to rescue you from mediocrity, from neglect, from invisibility. No one is going to give you the respect you don't demand for yourself. You decide what kind of man you become in this stage of your life. I want you to leave a comment with two things. First, where you're watching from, and second, a short phrase that sums up everything we talked about today. I'm still standing. If you truly understood the message, write it. Because standing tall isn't just about breathing and taking up space. It's about taking control of your life, moving with purpose, refusing to become a shadow of who you once were. I'm Celia, and this is Hogar de Sabiduria, a channel that doesn't tell you what you want to hear, but what you need to know. If you're looking for someone to comfort you and tell you everything is fine, this isn't the place for you. Here, we talk about dignity, independence, respect, about living with your head held high without asking for permission or apologizing for existing. If this message resonated with you, subscribe now and join this community of people who have chosen to wake up. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. It might hit them like a bucket of cold water, but sometimes that's exactly what it takes to open your eyes. And don't leave just yet. On the screen, you'll see two videos that will take this conversation even further. Pick one and keep going down the path you started today.